Welcome to Moving Through and Beyond, a podcast dedicated to sharing inspired journeys of redefining life, vision, and purpose after immense hardship and grief. My goal with this podcast is to give you hope and to let my guest journeys inspire you to make the choice to keep looking up. I'm your host, Carey Conley. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Moving Through and Beyond. I am your host, Carey Conley, obviously, and I get the great pleasure of bringing in guests that are willing to be very transparent about their stories, and sometimes I bring them back because they are the most viewed. Yours has been like in the top 3, Karen. And their story is just really rich, and there's more to the story. So I'm going to be talking to you today with my friend Karen on what's been going on in her life since, with her son, most especially, how our son has been dealing with all the things that happened with his dad. And I hope that this resonates and helps some of you that might have some kiddos that have been dealing with some pretty tragic stuff early on in their age. It's very unfortunate that I talk a lot to young adults that are in their 20s, and I'm finding that a lot of them at that early age have already been through a lot of grief. And it's shocking to me because when I came into my life in the 20s, it was nothing like that. So I'm thrilled that you get to hear this story today, and maybe it'll help your kiddos. So Karen, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
Yeah. I appreciate you doing this because it's not been very long since the death of your ex-husband, right?
Yeah, he passed.
Feels like it was yesterday.
Yep. Well, yeah. So we feel like we lost him twice. In 2019, October, right before the world fell still, before COVID. Right. Mike landed in the hospital after a gunshot wound to his head. And then this November 7th of 2023, he passed away in his home in Wisconsin, peacefully, fortunately. But we feel like we've lost him twice.
Yeah. Yeah, I want you to go back and kind of tell a little bit about that story about your husband attempting to take his life, right? And your son was how old at that time?
He would have been 12. Now he's 16.
Yeah. So I know, and you can share a little bit about how you dealt with it. It's interesting how when I batch my podcast interviews, Karen, how they all kind of align. This morning I had a woman on who I think you've met, Elizabeth Poisson, who's the founder of Helping Parents Heal.
Yes. And
we were talking a lot about how in helping parents heal in the organization, it's all parents who have lost a child one way or another. But they have an arm of the organization that's for siblings to talk about how they dealt with losing their siblings. And she said something today that I was not aware of. She said the hard part for the kiddos is that they don't want to talk to their parents about how they're feeling, because they're so concerned about their parents healing first that they heal last. And that was mind-blowing to me. And I thought about my daughter and I when we lost my husband, how that went down. And I'm sure, even as close as we are, there's a lot of things that she didn't communicate to me because she wants me to just be happy, right? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, the first time we lost Mike, we were very happily married and both running our own businesses. I knew that he wasn't feeling well physically. And that's all I thought it was. It ended up being addiction to oxycodone, some mental health issues, drugs and alcohol, gambling, you name it. And he attempted to take his life, survived. And then we went for the next, I would say, 9 months in and out of hospitals, trying to rehab and figure things out. And he just came home a very different version of himself. And it was difficult for Ivan in particular. It was chaos for both of us. Ultimately, I made the decision out of the emotional safety for my son and myself, really, to file for divorce. And, the chaos, it's all a blur. It's funny, as you were introducing our conversation today and mentioned I had been on before, I think that's been almost 2 years.
Well, this has been a year and a half since I've had the podcast.
Okay. So early, about a year and a half. So I'm anxious to go back and watch that one and listen to that one myself, because there's been so many iterations of my healing since all of this that I feel like I'm a very different person sitting here today.
I understand.
Yeah.
Completely. I had to tell somebody my story. I'm starting to incorporate my story of losing my husband and my son into my keynote speeches now.
Good.
I hope I can get through it.
I know.
I might need your help. But yeah, when he was asking me all these questions, tell me what happened next, tell me what, I had to say to him, it was all such a blur. I mean, I just went into total survival mode, right?
Yeah. And we're in survival mode. And of course, our kids are in survival mode. And it sounds like very protective of not only themselves and us. I did ask my son to join us today. I mentioned that before we came on live. And, he said, I'm not really up for it. However, if you want me to, I will, which I appreciated. I gave him some space and said, you don't have to. I said, but there's a couple questions I have for you that I'd be curious to share with the folks who are listening and paying attention. I said, what do you feel helped you the most? And he said, friends. And I said, what was the hardest thing in the early days? And he said, I don't know, Mom.
Yeah.
And I said, is that because you don't remember, or is that because this is all you know? He said, it's absolutely because it's all I know.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting because you and I both have experienced now these traumatic losses.
Right.
And it's all we know.
Right.
And when we're a child growing up and our brain is still forming and our relationships are still forming or deciding who we are in this world, this is all Ivan knows.
Right.
And so I love that because I got to thinking, part of what I think made a big difference for him and I is all the work that I had done around personal development and healing and growth work well before this ever happened.
Right.
I know I told the story last time, and I'll see if I can keep it brief, but about 3 days into Mike being in the hospital, I woke up in the morning and heard this voice that simply said, you're going to talk about this while it's happening. And I thought, well, that's awful. I don't want to do that. Right. And the next thing I heard was, I've prepared you your whole life for this. And again, I thought it was a joke. I didn't want to
pick somebody else, please.
Like how could I just lost the love of my life?
Yeah.
Or feeling like I wasn't sure that he was going to come home to us. I was hoping that we'd have full restoration and take off and ride into the sunset after we got through the difficult times. But to choose to speak to it publicly about it as it was happening. Even all these years later, still having conversations like this at times can be heavy. And I know that my life, learning to be really careful about my self-care, listening to that inner voice that sometimes can be very nagging and very negative and heavy, and really learning how to befriend myself, all ages, all aspects, all the the nooks and crannies that I don't want people to know about, learning to love those parts of me, has filtered into my 3 kiddos. So Ivan's not my only kiddo. I also have a 29 and a 27-year-old. And it's just the way in which I show up. So I think if there's a message I have for parents who are listening, whether they've had a tragedy or not, is do the work now.
Yeah. So true.
Get to know yourself now in a really intimate, loving way, and be that example and model for your kids so that they can have the kinds of friendships that you would want them to have if tragedy ever strikes. So for Ivan, he's got an incredible circle of friends. In fact, the wrestling team that he's competes with for high school, they're paying for 6 counseling sessions for him. Wow. His dad, again, has just passed a couple months ago, and it was a whole new, oh my gosh, what do we do with this? We've lost him once, now we've lost him again. And we have a community around us that's beautifully provided a lot of soft landings, great support, both financial and emotional. And I don't think when you're in chaos that you can establish rich friendships. I mean, you can. I know that. It's very helpful to have those rich friendships set up ahead of time. And you and I have talked about that before, how beautifully you've been held throughout your journey twice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying that you felt like you were told that you'd been prepared for this your whole life, right? Because I feel the same way about the work I do, obviously. Because when I work with people on vision, getting their vision out of their head and onto paper, it's because I did that for myself in my late 20s, very long time ago, not knowing why I was doing that. And I literally wrote out all these different ideas I had of what I was going to be doing with my life as a career. And one of the things I wrote for the first time ever popped out of my head that someday I wanted to help people write their own visions and goal set. And when my husband passed, I'd been teaching this now in the entrepreneurial world for many years. But when my husband passed, I knew that God had been preparing me for that. And then when my son passed, I said this to my speaker coach the other day. I said, the vision of my life has not changed, but the mission is amplified. That's the only difference, right? But the only way I could be prepared for that is that I did the work, a lot of personal growth work, and I surrounded myself with people who know how important that is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you were such a good example for your son, seeing how you dealt with your own healing, right?
I don't know if that was a good example. And maybe those were the words I used a few minutes ago. I was a mess.
No.
There were a lot of days I was a wreck.
Yeah. But you were
still-
so transparent about that, Karen. I remember you telling your story as you were going through it.
Very transparent. We're still transparent, very open today between the two of us. He's also 16 and really trying to, use his muscle and his weight, both figuratively and realistically to show who the man of the house is. And I'm really clear about not taking anything personally.
Yeah.
I've got some legal things going on that would suggest that somehow I'm the bad guy again, and I'm not taking it personally. I'm clear about who I am, and I'm grateful that my son has had as much stability as he possibly can have.
Right.
And again, I think that goes back to for our listeners and those folks watching and paying attention, do the work now. If there's something on your heart that you haven't healed, go find a way to heal it. If there's something that you are in a disagreement with your physical body, maybe you don't like an aspect of the way that you're showing up or a part of your body that hurts and ails you or whatever it is, go figure out how to get that fixed and healed. And I'm not talking surgery or I mean, maybe that's your thing, but really just look to see what's stuck in your body, mentally, emotionally, relationship-wise. There are so many resources out there. You and I are a couple examples of great resources for people. And there's a lot of free information online. Just go do the work and don't stop doing it or don't stop trying until you feel like you are the best version of yourself.
Right. That's so hard to hear sometimes, especially as parents, because we can go in denial so easily.
Yeah.
No, I'm not the problem. I'm fine.
Well, you and I have done that, and you and I have had those conversations.
Yeah.
Even those of us who speak the truth about these kinds of things, we're not without falling in the dark shadows in our own journeys as well.
Yeah. But that's the hard work. But the thing is, and you and I have worked together. You've helped me with some of my healing. That is not the fun stuff, guys. I mean, it's awful. Like, I go kicking and screaming.
Yes, you do.
Into every session and everything I do. But I know that if I don't, then I'm not going to be able to be any good for my daughter and my grandsons. And I want to be there for them. And I think so many times we can let ourselves off the hook when it's just about us. But when you make it about a bigger mission outside of yourself, like you and I are doing now, and about your family, it's a whole other thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other piece I would say, too, with Ivan as a 16-year-old, he really is trying to find his own way.
Sure.
And his way is just that. It's his way. It's not necessarily my way. And he reminds me of that almost daily. And he'll say things to me, Mom, I've got a good head on my shoulders. Or I'll send it he's driving now and just past the point of his license where he can have more than one kid in the car with him after that little 6-month period of time. And he's now at parties where they're drinking and likely doing drugs. And I'm so anxious and concerned about the choices he's going to make. Sure. And he's going to make his own choices. But I can't hover over him. I can't overprotect. We've had some epic battles around me wanting to impose my sense of control over him, and I've had to explain it's my wanting to protect him. It's me wanting to love him and want what's best for him, and I've had to be a really good listener and hear him back. He's like, I know all that about you, and there are times, Mom, that you are overboard. And so we've been able to talk about it, and I can apologize, I can look at it, I can reflect, I can back off. We've made agreements. He still has expectations around the house, things like that. Yep. I'm glad now that our battles are really around picking up dog poop. That's our biggest battle lately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Do you feel that through everything with your husband that you and Ivan have grown closer because of it? Or were you close before then and that's just amplified?
So I'm close to all three of my kiddos. I can say that Ivan and I are extraordinarily closer than Maddie and Grady and I were, although I'm very close to my adult kids as well.
Yeah.
they were already out of the house when Mike attempted suicide. And so, yeah, there's just something about the bond between Ivan and I. And I'll say that he's very protective of me, too. I mentioned to you when we first connected today, because it's been a while since we've seen each other.
Yeah.
I'm now dating again. I've been with the same man for 6 months. I'm in a really happy and whole and healthy relationship. And Ivan's been a little protective of that. He really likes Ruben, but at the same time, he wants to continue to have that close, safe connection with me. And we've had to really say, Ruben and I both have said to him, hey, look, this isn't about coming in and taking over. And this is, just growing alongside each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Because after my husband passed, my kids, we've all been close for forever. After losing my husband and then my son, it was just a whole new dynamic in the relationship for my daughter and I, right? And I'm so grateful that we were close before, because if we had been on the outs or always in conflict, I don't know how we would have been able to support each other, right? And be honest with each other, because we have dealt with these journeys similarly, but also in different ways. Like you say, Ivan's going to find his way. Laurel had to do the same. So I just really want to encourage parents to really, this has been a theme for today, to communicate with your kids and give them space to talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll go the next layer underneath that. The foundation for that is if we're not honest and communicative with ourselves, then it's very hard for us to be that sounding board for our kids and be able to separate ourselves, even with as much work as we've done. I just mentioned that I've had some hard, crunchy moments where I've had to look at myself and go, oh, I'm putting this on top of my kid. I'm mirroring, or he's mirroring aspects of me that I don't like.
Right.
And I've got to undo that so that he can have his own journey. So again, it comes down to there's a lot of joy and a lot of discomfort when it comes to discovering the best version of who we are.
Right.
Yeah.
And dealing through the grief at the same time, through the loss.
Which is why I suggest we make sure that we have, our ducks in a row well before something's going to happen, because something's going to happen. Hopefully not as tragic as what you and I have experienced.
Right.
And life is going to happen. COVID taught us that.
Right.
Life is going to be filled with surprises.
Right.
And some of them are going to be extraordinarily unpleasant.
Yeah.
So how do we get to know ourselves through the difficult times and then really get to sit back and love who we are in the times that are easier?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring up COVID, because I made this, I had this awareness that the people who struggled so much with that were the people that had not experienced anything really rocky in their life yet.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like, whatever.
Yeah.
It was like, what's happening?
I can't remember exactly what day, but again, October 2019 is when our life fell apart. March 2020 is when I feel like the world fell apart and it shut down. And jokingly, I thought to myself, well, misery loves company. I'm glad everybody else is experiencing, jokingly, of course, but I'm glad everybody else is experiencing this crazy upheaval,
right?
Because it's so disarming and leaves you just kind of flatlined and not knowing where to go and where to turn. And then you build that resiliency and that grit and that tenacity and that ability to say, okay, you know what, I've got this.
Right.
But if you're not, if you don't have some of those skills going into it, it can be harder and sometimes for people crippling.
Yeah. So as a healer, coach that really works with people through their healing process, what are some of the things that you would give as little nuggets if somebody's listening and they're trying to help their child through something they've been through that's been pretty traumatic?
Staying in touch with your physical body is really important. So, and I know this is your favorite part of the work that I do.
Oh, no. Are we going to do this now?
We're not going to tap right now. However, I am a Tao guide, and I really believe in gut health and making sure that our gut is vibrant and alive and moving. So Carey has done some tapping with me. So when it comes to our kids...
because you're tapping on your stomach, right? And if you don't have rock hard abs...
Which I don't either.
Right? It's like you're just feeling that.
And the idea, right. So it's awkward. It's different. I do it with men and women and children. It's rarely anybody's favorite until they've been with me enough times. I know we're getting somewhere in their overall well-being when they come in and they stand up right away and they're ready to tap. It's when they sit down, they try to come up with conversations.
Apparently I didn't last long.
No. But to go back to your question, what can parents do to really help a kid through these things? We need to get back into our bodies. When we experience trauma, we flee or we freeze or we fight or we fawn. We are designed to do something else besides feel all the pain of that moment. However, to get back to today and be able to move forward, we have to be back in our container. I always like to tell people we have an emotional age and a chronological age. I don't know if we talked about that last time or not. I wish I could reference who I learned this from, but I can't. Perhaps it was Debbie Ford. Our chronological age, of course, is how many years or days we are on this earth after we've been born. Our emotional age is typically when we've experienced a big T trauma or a series of little t traumas, enough so that our emotional capacity is at its kind of breaking point and we stop emotionally growing. So let's say I'm born into an alcoholic family and there's abuse, or maybe I experienced a car accident as a 15-year-old. Whenever those points are in my life that have happened, that's my emotional age. And my goal as a guide and someone to work with you towards integration is to make sure that your chronological age matches your emotional age. And so it's a great example is when two people are arguing, maybe a husband and wife, and they can't see eye to eye. And we walk away from those arguments thinking, oh my God, he totally acted like a 14-year-old, or boy, she sure was acting like throwing a tantrum like she's a 9-year-old. Well, that's because likely that's where some of the emotional growth got stuck or stymied. We can grow in also different areas, but emotionally we need to make sure that we are learning how to move past those breaking points. And so physically living in our body helps us do that. And that's why when I tap with clients, I help them remember, like, I help them relate to, what are you feeling in your body? Where do you feel this? Let's move it. Let's move it out of there, because the body keeps score. There's that great book I think we talked about last time it was here. The body keeps score. And we need to make sure that we are a container that can really be here for longevity, for your grandkids and mine.
Yeah. And so important that our kids learn this early on, because once that traumatic experience, whether it's little t or big T, it gets embedded in the body, and it's really hard to get it out the longer it's been there.
Yep.
Because like you said earlier, this is all I know.
It's all we know. Yeah.
So, it's interesting to me because it's now been almost 10 years since my husband passed.
Gosh, it's been that long. And how long since your son?
It'll be 7. We were 3 years apart. Wow. So it's hard for me, Karen, to remember what I was like before all this. Sometimes I like to play a little game with myself and think, how did I feel when I woke up in the morning before all this happened? I just don't even know what that would be. So I think it's just really important, especially because our kids are going through so much in this world right now. The pressure is huge.
There's never a downtime for them with the way technology is.
Yeah, never a downtime. Most of the 20-year-olds that I talk to, the young gentleman who's usually in here with me is an intern. He's 21 years old. And I asked him one day in between interviews, I said, how do you feel about your life? How does your generation feel? And he said, I feel like I'm starting my life in a very hostile environment.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm going to be interviewing him next.
Yeah.
He was very wise. Yeah. I said, what does that mean? He said, just there's so much pressure from every direction. Because of COVID, I'm sure they are very unsure what the world really even holds for them. And they already have so much grief.
Yep.
Because this was, not the world that I walked into at 22. I mean, nobody in my high school took their life. I mean, this is just not.
And now it's every other day.
And now all of them, if you ask them, they all probably know somebody, right? Or been through school shooting or something really traumatic. So they're starting a life in a lot of pressure and with a lot of trauma already.
And most of the experiences that our kids are participating in, whether they're gaming or they're on Snapchat or they're on social media, so much of, and not just our kids, right? As adults, we are too, but so much of our attention is on a screen these days.
Yeah.
And it's very singularly dimensional.
Yeah.
And we can sit for hours and we're not engaged in our body. We're not utilizing our gut. We're not processing through that that brain, right? It's been, research has shown that we have 3 brains. The brain that we've always referred to, our gut and our heart, they function in a very important way in our body. So when we have all these competing resources for our attention and these hostile environments, depending on what you're plugging into, we've got to find a way to bring these kids back and see that they're responsible for which direction they want to move in.
Right.
Yeah.
And have a big, beautiful vision for their life.
Right.
I mean, that's my whole thing, is I want to get them past their perceptions of what their circumstances are right now and get them to see that they can create their life to look like however they really want. And I think that's super challenging for them right now because...
And what happens when they don't have that? I think that's the other piece of it, right? If I went through that too. I think you and I have both talked about this. If I couldn't see clearly what I wanted for my business today in the middle of the chaos, or what I wanted to be and how I wanted to show up as a parent, and what I had hoped for Ivan, if I couldn't really hang my everyday decisions on those things, I would have just been circling around the drain. Yeah.
When I do my workshops, I talk a lot about that, around how my vision has pulled me through everything, big and small. You know, starting my first business in network marketing in the early 90s, when that was just, you didn't do that. You didn't leave a college degree and a good job to go do network marketing. There was a lot of rejection, a lot of pushback, a lot of personal growth I had to go through. And then, you know, losing people and, you know, all the stuff we've been talking about. And when people ask me, how did you keep going? And the thing I tell people is my faith, number one, and secondly, that my vision has always been bigger than whatever I was dealing with at the moment. And so that's kind of a key thing, is you have to create that vision, because there's always going to be life.
Yep.
You've got to want something bigger than the pain and the wall that you're dealing with right there.
Yes.
Yeah. So I know you're doing such a great job of that with Ivan, right? Now he's going to be out of the house in a couple of years.
Couple more years. Yeah. It's funny. He said the other day, he's a sophomore this year. He said, I'm thinking, and he didn't use the word gap year or the phrase gap year, but that's what he meant. He's like, I think I just want to work out and work my first year after high school. And of course I went, what? Like, tell me more.
Good answer.
Yeah, tell me more. What is this? Yeah. And we really kind of found our way to a conversation around, you know, well, what would that gap year provide you? You know, the year after or the year after that.
Right.
So we could kind of be able to articulate what he was wanting. He wants to have a little bit more breathing room.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to wait for 2.5 more years for him to have that breathing room.
Yeah.
We're creating it now. At the time that we had this conversation, he was not doing well in Spanish. His dad had just passed away. And the pressure to be an athlete and an honor student was a lot for him. And I said, what do you think would help you? And he said, I want to go into regular Spanish. So we had to look at what are the consequences of that and what are some of the benefits, and let him make his decision. Much to my, you know, disappointment, I wouldn't have made that decision, but it's been the right decision for him. And so he went into the regular Spanish class, and he now feels like he has some breathing room. So, you know, I feel like we are making strides. Again, having him develop his own set of muscles that, again, are not necessarily the ones that I would choose for him.
Right.
But he also knows who he is at his core and what's most important to him. That's another thing, too.
So
core
important.
Values, right?
Yes.
A friend, Brian Stinson, has a company called Peak Fleet. Okay. I don't know. Do you know Brian? I really think he'd be a great somebody for you to interview. He and his partner created these deck of cards. They both worked for Intel for their career, and when they retired, they did these core value cards. And there's this whole process they do either with teams and businesses or families and individuals where you get to decide, what are my core values? Ivan and I did it years ago, and our core values were very different. Like, honesty to me was one of my top 3 core values. Not even close for my kiddo. Yeah. That could be a bone of contention for us.
Right.
So I would encourage families to get a feel for, you know, what are our family values, and then what are individual core values as well. And Brian's cards would be great. Peak Fleet.
Nice. Yeah. I love resources. Thank you for that. Yeah, I just really was hoping that the message would come across loud and clear with your story and your relationship with your son and your other kids, Karen, that it's all about communicating and just leaving space for that. Because it is they're too busy. There's no space. And I love how you asked the question, tell me more about that. instead of going, what?
Well, I've done what, and it doesn't work. And yes, being a better listener and reserving my opinion and being able to just hold back and trust. Most of the time, if I can just be quiet long enough, that my intensity and my need to speak up and say something fades away.
Yeah, it's giving up. It's surrendering.
Over and over and over again. Waving the white flag. Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah, it's hard. I've noticed that with myself, with my daughter, and especially my grandchildren.
Yes, then they're how old now? They're
the littlest one just turned 1, and the older one will be 4 in May. And I have the tendency, if my daughter was in the room, she'd be laughing right now. I can hear her in my head, to want to be more like their mom, right? And I'm more fearful with them, something happening to them, than what I was with my own kids. This makes sense, right? So I have to remind myself, and my daughter will tell me, "You're not the mom. You're not the mom." But it's hard. It's hard. Just surrender. It's not. They're not.
Yep.
They're not my babies, and really, our kids aren't either.
They're not.
We just get to have them for a little while.
They're here on loan.
And not impart too much of our own wishes on them.
Yes.
I think that the biggest thing I think would help lessen suicide, especially in young adults and teens, is if they could be allowed to figure out their own life more and earlier. Because a lot of them are coming out following a path that somebody else told them to take, and they're getting in these careers, Karen, and they're not happy. So,
along with that line of thinking around the honors classes, when my son and I were talking about, he's like, "Mom," and we're talking about careers and college and that thing, because he really doesn't know yet. I don't think many kids know at that age, right? Unless they're pushed or encouraged into a direction. And he said, "I have a lot of friends who are in honors classes and are very bright. And the pressure on them, whether it's self-pressure, teacher pressure, family pressure, parent pressure, or whatever it is, a combination," he says they're unhappy. They're miserable. They don't like what they're doing. They don't like the club sport that they're playing anymore because it's so intense and it takes a lot of their time. They don't like having to study all the time. And granted, there's this balance, right? I mean, we have to be reasonable about how we kind of push and encourage our kids. And then we also need to know when we can take our hands off. And that's part of what I've just been trying to learn, how much. In fact, when his Spanish teacher emailed me and he said, and he happened to be the baseball coach, and he's like, "I know if he applied himself more and studied, he would be doing fine in this class. However, I just at least want to let you know that he's asked if he can be released from this course. And while I think he can do it, I just wanted your opinion." And I came back and I said, "I know he could do it. And at the same time, I'm trying to find out how much I should keep my boot up against his butt and how much I should just step back and say, all right, well, whatever happens with this will be what happens with this. And it's how you make a decision after that and after that and after that will really take you where you need to go."
Yeah, but I think it's important we let them breathe.
Breathing. Yes. Back to the body metaphor, right? I mean, really. That
if he's saying and communicating, "I need time, I need space, I need a break."
Yep.
I mean, these are signs. These are signals that,
Yeah.
So good for you
Yeah.
for recognizing that. I know that it's not been an easy journey, especially going through, losing his dad. Now you're dealing with some family issues and all sorts of stuff. So I appreciate you.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. I'm glad you asked.
Yeah. How do people find you, Karen, if they want to know more about what you do?
Well, I'm out there. Facebook, Karen Nowicki, Instagram, and LinkedIn are the best resources. I'm on there quite a bit for both my coaching practice and for the podcasting studio that I own. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're awesome.
Well, thank you.
Great
Love being
friend.
with you.
Yeah. Thank you. I always feel so much calmer when I'm with you.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate
and I'll walk
it.
out of here. Thank you.
Well,
appreciate
thanks.
your time.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode. I hope you get some great takeaways, especially if you are a parent that has a child that has been through something traumatic, maybe in your own family or maybe them losing a friend. It could be anything. That this will give you some space to start communicating with them, because I think they do want to talk. They just don't know how, and I don't think they're given really any time or any encouragement. So I'm just finding that this is so important, especially, again, with the young adults that I've started working with and talking to, is that they just feel so much pressure, and they don't have a vision for their life beyond today. And what they're seeing today is, like I said, a very hostile world, and they lose hope very easily. So I just want to encourage you to give them some breathing room, allow them to have their own vision of their life, whatever that is, and just keep loving on them. So thanks for listening to this episode, and I'm here to remind you to just keep looking up. If you found this episode inspiring or helpful, please share it with a friend or a family member. In order to be successful on this mission, I can't do it alone. Connect with me at www.careyconley.com, and don't forget to sign up for my weekly Do It On Purpose newsletter. Let's build this life-giving vision movement together to end this epidemic, save lives, and create purpose.